Hi, today I'm going to talk with you about my research project, which was titled Computer-Based versus Paper-Pencil-Based Assessments, an action research study of 7th grade science test method performance. The purpose of this research study was to compare performance of students on paper-based tests versus computer-based tests. The study was conducted in a 7th grade science classroom over a 5-week unit of instruction incorporating a learning management system, which was Schoology. After the results were analyzed, the scores on the end of unit assessment did not show a significant difference between the paper and the online versions of the test. Both groups had an average score of 78% on the assessment. Over the past few years, online testing has become more and more prevalent, especially with the increased use of technology in the classroom. Even the state-mandated tests are turning to online testing. For example, in Ohio, 64% of students were tested online for the PARCC assessment, while just 34% completed it on paper. There were reports that stated students tended to score lower when testing online versus paper-pencil. So due to this change in testing mode, the question of equivalency has come up. This was of great interest to me to see if the test mode did, in fact, affect student performance. After further research into the topic, I found there are definite benefits to testing online. Computers allow for a rich interface. Basically, there are more opportunities for colorful graphics, charts, or even interactive features that the paper versions lack. Also, there is immediate feedback to the test taker. There are some programs that will adapt to the user based on whether they are answering the questions correctly or not, which a paper version definitely would lack. Online testing allows for much quicker grading, and it has better accuracy. Lastly, online testing eliminates the need for paper, which could also be more cost-effective. The purpose of my research study is to investigate which method of assessment is best for student performance in my 7th grade science classroom. I wanted to determine if the test mode alone would impact their scores. There were two groups formed. One group that tested online using Schoology, while the second group tested on paper. There were no differences in their instruction. Both groups utilized Schoology over the 5 weeks of instruction, and the only difference was the test mode. This topic is of importance to me for a few key reasons. First, there was very little research that I found based on a classroom level. Most research was done on entrance level testing to determine whether online and paper versions were equivalent due to the high stakes. For example, one study investigated the results of the Praxis to see if they were comparable between the two test modes. They did conclude that the two test modes were equivalent. I wanted to know if this held true to my classroom. The second reason this is of importance is because I want to know what method of assessment is best for the age and ability level of my students. This research will help to better my teaching, instruction, and assessment methods for the future. My official research question for this study was, does test administration method, computer-based and paper-based, affect scores for students in 7th grade science? Taking a look at Table 1, you can see that I have defined my variables for the research question. The test administration method is my independent variable, which is defined as the method in which students are assessed, either online or paper. The dependent variable would be the student scores that would be defined as the percentage of correct student responses on the teacher-developed assessment following instruction using Schoology. The design of my research study was quasi-experimental since I was unable to match my testing groups exactly. I thought using a post-test only design would be the best because it enabled me to single out the test mode to be the only variable manipulated. After the data was collected through the assessment, the test scores were analyzed to determine if the test mode actually impacted student performance. The sample in my research study included 151 7th graders between the ages of 12 to 13 years old. All attended the same rural Northwest Ohio middle school. Since the students were already defined by their class period since the beginning of the school year, I was unable to regroup them. I decided to split my 6 science classes in half to create my 2 groups. I designated my 3 morning classes as the online group and my 3 afternoon classes as the paper group. By dividing them through class periods, it definitely was the most efficient and convenient way to assess them. The demographics of the sample of students is shown here in Table 2. Some of the key things to point out are that racial diversity in the whole sample was quite low, and about 94% of the population was Caucasian. Also, the male to female ratio was very similar between the 2 groups, having approximately 44% males and 56% females. It was very surprising to see how similar the online tested and paper tested groups were with the random placement of students through their class period. The procedures for this study were quite simple. The students in both groups were treated exactly the same. They received instruction during their 43-minute science class period with Schoology implemented over a 5-week span of time. The unit I taught was over land and aquatic biomes. At the end of the unit, students were given a summative assessment with 30 multiple choice and short response type questions. The online tested group was assessed using Schoology, and the paper tested group was on paper. There was great detail in making sure the 2 tests were identical. I made sure the questions were in the same order. I inserted page breaks on Schoology to match the paper version, and I made sure all the images were identical and in black and white. The data collected from the tests was reported as a cumulative total of correct responses given by the students, which was in a percentage form. The online version was graded automatically except for the short response, which I graded using a rubric, and the paper version was graded entirely by me. Both inferential and descriptive statistics were used to analyze the data. First, looking at the descriptive data results, the mean for each group was calculated, and I was very shocked to see that the group that tested online had a mean of 78.79%, and the paper tested group had a mean of 78.44%. There was only a 0.35% difference. There was no real significance in the average scores. In fact, they were nearly identical. Just in case the numbers weren't clear enough, here's a graphic that shows just how similar the test means were. Very, very close. I thought it would be beneficial to also look at the data in terms of letter grades to possibly see a pattern. One thing that stood out was the significant difference of students getting A's and B's. There was a higher percentage of students earning an A in the paper group, which was 15%, compared to the online group, which was only 3.8%. Also, the online group had a higher percentage of students scoring a B, 46%, compared to the paper group, which was 22%. The rest of the letter grades were fairly similar between the 2 groups. This could possibly mean that the higher achieving students may be more affected by the test mode. Here you can see in Figure 2 the breakdown of letter grades between the online and paper assessments. And this clearly shows that there is great significance in the A and B letter grade range. I also used a t-test of independent samples for the inferential testing. It was found that the test administration method did not significantly affect 7th grade science test scores, where T of 149 equaled 0.1846, P equaled 0.8538, and it was two-tailed. So both the descriptive and inferential test results showed there was no significant difference in the test mode. In conclusion, it was found that through my results, there was no real significance between the two test modes of online and paper-based testing. Implementing Schoology did not impact the online or paper-tested group results. Both groups had nearly identical test mean scores of 78%, and they had very similar letter grade breakdowns, except for that A and B letter grade range. There could be some connection between the test mode and higher achieving students, but I think more research would need to be done to determine that. Here are some limitations to this study. External validity is limited due to the results being collected from one small population during just one unit of study. I don't believe any generalizations can be made. Also, the threats to internal validity included selection. Since I was unable to completely match up the members of the online and paper-tested groups, they were not identical or equivalent. They were purely matched based on their class periods. Although the demographics of the samples were similar, other factors could have played a role in these results. Some recommendations that I have would be to continue to incorporate Schoology as a means of instruction. As long as the test modes are identical, you should be receiving similar test results, since this study showed equivalency between the two test modes. I would continue monitoring the online assessments and increase technology use in the classroom to see if the increased technology does help with online assessments. Thanks for listening.